For many years, research into autism has focused primarily on observable behaviours, with less attention given to the internal, subjective experience of being autistic. Today we're exploring the implications of this, particularly on how autistic individuals make sense of themselves over time. In this video, we'll explore this through the concept of sense of self, the role of masking, and how labels like high functioning can sometimes obscure important internal experiences. Hello and welcome back to Unwinding Minds. If you're new here, hi, it's nice to meet you. I'm Rosie. I'm a chronically ill counsellor based in the UK who specialises in supporting disabled, neurodiverse and chronically ill people with managing their mental health. I also make these videos on the side as a bit of a supplement to offering those private counselling services to support everyone really, including those who may not be able to access counselling with a professional at this time, such as myself. It's important to state, however, that these videos are not a substitute for counselling, and they never will be. They're only intended to support with psychoeducation. Something I've noticed repeatedly in my work with autistic clients that I wanted to talk about today is the difficulty with the sense of self, particularly in those who are often described as high functioning. And I want to say upfront that this isn't necessarily a label I personally adhere to, and I'll go through my reasons why. The idea of being high functioning is usually a neurotypical description of how autism looks from the outside. It doesn't tell us much about what's actually happening on the inside. Many of the people who I've worked with fall into this category, and they aren't necessarily functioning at a higher level. In fact, they're often internalizing an enormous amount. The very real distress, confusion, emotional labour and cognitive load that they're experiencing simply isn't visible to outsiders. The pattern I can observe repeatedly here is that they're processing the world very differently, often very quietly, very painfully, and very alone. And the people around them may have absolutely no clue that this is the case, particularly neurotypical people. And that brings me to the core topic of this video, the sense of self in autism and neurodivergence, what it means to have a strong sense of self, what it means to struggle with it, and why this struggle seems to appear so frequently in autistic individuals. A lot of autism research has historically been conducted on autistic people rather than with them, primarily by neurotypical researchers, in my view, and you're free to disagree as I'm not a paragon of all truth or knowledge. This may have led to an overemphasis on external behaviours and an underexploration of the internal experience. So today I want us to slow down together and just take a look beneath the surface at what's going on. What do we mean by sense of self? This is an important thing for us to define together, because before we can talk about autism specifically, we need a shared understanding of what psychologists mean when they talk about a sense of self. Broadly speaking, a sense of self includes the following: a stable feeling of who you are across time and situations, an understanding of one's own thoughts, emotions, needs, and values, a sense of agency. I am the one having these experiences and making these decisions, for example. Emotional boundaries between self and others. In neurotypical development, this sense of self is gradually shaped through social mirroring in most cases. Children learn who they are by seeing themselves reflected back consistently by caregivers, peers, and by society as a whole. But here's the key point. This process assumes a shared social and sensory language. But here lies the first key point. This process assumes a shared social and sensory language. When your internal experience is fundamentally different due to brain differences from the people around you, that social mirroring isn't necessarily an innate skill. It may be absent altogether or simply much harder to do. I want to talk briefly about some other aspects of the internal experience being different from the more neurotypical experiences that you see, because there are many layers to the differences between neurotypical and non-neurotypical people. Many autistic people experience differences in interoception, which is the ability to feel and interpret internal bodily states. They may also experience alexithymia, which broadly speaking is a difficulty in identifying and describing your emotions. And another thing, heightened sensory processing or high sensitivity. They may also feel non-linear or have associative thinking styles. Research has linked autism with higher rates of alexithymia, though it is important to note that these things are overlapping but distinct constructs. Someone can have alexithymia without being autistic. What's often missed is that difficulty identifying emotions within yourself or others is not the same as lacking emotions, and difficulty articulating the self is not the same as lacking a self. Instead, what I often see when working with autistic clients is a private, complex inner world that lacks a shared translation system. When autistic individuals repeatedly receive feedback that their internal experiences are wrong, too much, or confusing, they may learn to distrust their own perceptions, both of themselves and the world. So often when I'm counselling autistic people, I hear this experience of distrust in their judgments around how they feel, how they ought to feel, or whether they're navigating their relationships in the right way. This can affect anyone, of course, but autistic people have a higher likelihood of experiencing this for all the reasons that I've mentioned before. This is important because this may be part of why the difficulties with sense of self begin to form. You see, autistic people, as a result of having experiences that don't match their neurotypical peers very often, well, they usually begin to mask or camouflage their real self. It's a protective thing, but in doing that, a disconnect forms from the real self. Masking involves consciously or unconsciously suppressing autistic traits in order to appear more neurotypical. And studies have linked long-term masking with the following: increased anxiety and depression, autistic burnout, identity confusion, and unfortunately increased levels of suicidality. So it's really serious. From a psychological perspective, masking is a product of a fundamental question. If who I naturally am is unacceptable to others, then who am I allowed to be? Over time, many autistic individuals become highly attuned to others' expectations, whilst losing access to their own internal compass. They may know how to perform competence, kindness, or intelligence, but not to answer the question, who am I, when nobody else is watching? It may be challenging to know what it means to relax, for example, to know what you like to do when you're alone, because you get so comfortable with trying to mirror the neurotypical example that when no one is standing there, you can't see a reflection anymore, not even your own. No video about sense of self and autism would be complete without at least analysing the theory of mind. One of the most influential and in contemporary circles controversial ideas in autism research is theory of mind, put forward by Simon Baron-Cohen and his colleagues. The notion that autistic people have a reduced ability to understand the thoughts, intentions, or perspective of others. Historically, this theory has unfortunately been used to explain social differences in autism. It comes with a significant limitation, however. Number one, it's largely based on structured tasks that measure performance in artificial settings rather than in lived and relational contexts. Number two, it assumes that there is a single neurotypical way of understanding minds, and that deviation from that norm represents a deficit in the person. What's often overlooked is that many autistic people demonstrate deep perspective taking when given time, safety, and shared context, but may struggle specifically with neurotypical social rules, implicit cues, or rapid social inference. In other words, what gets framed as a lack of theory of mind might actually just be a mismatch of cognitive styles, or even the double empathy problem, where both autistic and neurotypical people struggle to intuit each other's internal worlds. When theory of mind is treated as a global deficit, it risks pathologizing differences we see while obscuring the complexity and richness of the inner autistic experience. That was a lot of heavy and dense information, so let's take this back to a human level, shall we? There seems to be a lot in the research already done on autistic people for there to have been a strong focus on why autistic people are different from allistic people, where the default base of normal is a neurotypical mind. And again, that reinforces to an autistic person and their support network, however subconsciously, that the priorities lie in looking more neurotypical and less autistic, rather than supporting autistic people to be more comfortable with their identity. There's a lot to be said for the way that this affects the support that we give each other. Because when supported appropriately, autistic selfhood can be so helpful to both autistic and allistic people. Most psychological models of identity were developed with neurotypical populations in mind, and we have to bear that in mind when we think about treating others. They often assume verbal emotional access, social reciprocity, I hate that word, so sorry if I pronounced it wrong, as central to identity, linear developmental trajectories, i.e. there's only one way to grow, and those assumptions limit how well the models apply to autistic people. We need a few more frameworks, really, that center first-person experiences, that account for sensory and cognitive differences without belittling them, and separate expression from existence. So if you're autistic and you've always struggled with knowing who you are, what you like, and then doing those things, I want to share this thought of mine. The difficulty isn't and never has been that you lack a self. It's that humans are masters of adaptation, and you have figured out how to adapt yourself to try and fit into a world that hasn't adapted for you in return. That may have led you to prioritizing others' wants and likes above your own, but contact with that inner world of yours is possible still. It involves learning to trust yourself again, creating a sense of safety to allow that to happen, and more broadly, cultural changes would help with this as well. If you've made it this far, please know that I'm very grateful to you. If this episode feels relevant to you or has resonated with you, please take a second to like it, to subscribe, or to share it with somebody else who might need to hear this message today. You never know, our actions can ripple out and really make a difference to other people's lives. We make a lot of videos about chronic illness, disability, neurodivergence, and mental health on this channel, and I'm always really very interested to see what people want to see more of. So if you've got any thoughts, put them down in the comments section below. And do check the description if you are interested in working with me on a one-to-one basis, as I do also offer private counselling. Thank you so much for watching, and take really good care.